Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea have come together annually to implement a democracy gathering, a forum in Asia aimed at promoting the implementation of Goal 16 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. In 2018, we first gathered in Busan in the Republic of Korea, and then in 2019 in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. I know as we were preparing to come online today, some of us were talking about how eager we are to be back together again soon. And I'm looking forward to that time too. But of course, last year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to do this gathering, the Kathmandu Democracy Forum, online. And this year, we're also meeting online. But we're doing something a little bit different, and that is we're bringing together two important regions, Asia with Africa, providing a space for interregional dialogue, for knowledge sharing, and cooperation about the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't have to tell you the current global context is very much affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Its effects are being felt on every area of society, including the economy, education, poverty reduction. We're also seeing its impact on climate crisis and the effects it's having on food security, on issues important to us all like conflict and migration. I would say for the community of democracies and myself, it's by no means an exaggeration to say COVID-19 has posed a critical test to the world's democracies. And it's also affecting the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by our target of 2030. However, during the past few months, civil society organizations, many gathered here now, in Asia and Africa have been actively developing reports on the state of implementation of the SDGs, using the voluntary national review reports presented by their countries and others. And so we've been looking at trends of democracy and civic space in both Africa and Asia, at civic engagement in regional and global mechanisms and processes. And we've also been seeing NGOs, civil society conduct comparative analysis on SDGs vis-a-vis a response and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So over these next 3 days, I'm looking forward, and I'm sure you are too, to the opportunity to hear from your friends in civil society organizations across both regions, who are going to present main findings from their reports. And together we can discuss how to address the various challenges, threats to democracy, but also opportunities for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. I want to give a special thanks now to our partner, the Asia Democracy Network, for putting in place this important virtual forum. And of course, I also wish to thank our generous and consistent donor, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for the support they have been giving for so many years now, which makes this Interregional Democracy Forum possible. I also want to extend my gratitude to each of you for your participation and your continued efforts towards supporting implementation of the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and for strengthening democracy's resilience in this very critical time. I know we're coming from many different time zones. It's evening for some of you, it's morning for some of us. And so with that, I don't want to continue to take your time, but I want you to turn now to the important work that you have for the next 3 days. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Suyeon Seo to introduce us to the agenda of today's meeting. I give the floor to you, Ms. Seo.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning to everybody. My name is Sue. I'm the program manager at the Asia Democracy Network, and I'll be introducing the Asia-Africa Democracy Forum, the background, purposes, program agenda, and the session schedule. I'm hoping that everyone is able to see my screen. So as Secretary General Garrett has introduced, this year we have a partner with and have been partnering with the Community of Democracies in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the past 5-6 years and doing this annual democracy forum. This year, the theme is defending and promoting democracy and civic space with SDGs, along with the partnership of all these great organizations you see here on your screen. All right. What is the Asia-Africa Democracy Forum? This is a joint initiative with the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies, Asia Democracy Network, to defend and promote democracy and civic space through an interregional dialogue and cooperation in the Global South as a follow-up to the previous democracy forums we've had in Asia since 2018. This year, as I mentioned, the theme is defending and promoting democracy and civic space with SDGs. And we are expected to address the various challenges, threats to democracy and civic space, as well as the opportunities for international civic engagement on democracy and SDGs in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The objectives are to promote international solidarity and cooperation among civil society organizations and democracy advocates in Asia as well as Africa, engage in civic advocacy and public diplomacy with policymakers of the governmental and intergovernmental organizations on democracy, civic space, human rights, and SDGs. This is definitely a new initiative for ADN to be expanding outside of Asia and doing interregional collaboration. The topics we'll be covering through the various presentations and research that has been done by the researchers of Asia and Africa will be the impact of COVID-19 on democracy and civic space in Asia and Africa, state of the SDG implementation in Asia and Africa through the voluntary national reviews and the Universal Periodic Review, civic engagement with the United Nations, regional organizations, and international processes in Asia and Africa, and of course, participation of civil society from Asia and Africa in the democratization of global governance mechanisms and processes, focusing on SDG 16 goal and target 8, broadening and strengthening the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. All right, and then just to go show you briefly the various democracy forums we have been collaborating together. This journey started in 2018 with the Community of Democracies when we started off with the Busan Democracy Forum. There the theme was promoting peaceful, inclusive, just societies in Asia. Then we went on to in Mongolia in 2019, Ulaanbaatar, and then our partners, JANIC in Japan, organized the Tokyo Democracy Forum. And then we again held, in 2019, our partners, YMCA Busan, held another Busan Democracy Forum in 2019. We also held in 2020 the Kathmandu Democracy Forum. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that was also online. And of course, we're having our Asia-Africa Democracy Forum in 2021 again. All right, so just to go over what you'll be experiencing through the next 3 days. Of course, today we'll be having the opening session. We just heard from Secretary General Garrett, and then I'll be introducing. And then on the third day closing, we will adopt the recommendations and then have closing remarks from our Secretary General of ADN. And just to go deeply into the specific sessions. So today will be session 1 on Asia, SDGs, and civic space in the context of COVID-19. And we have a great panel of speakers from Asia who have been doing the actual research, and they'll be sharing with us their assessments and findings and the various obstacles that they found on the research topic. And of course, we'll be joined by discussants Joycena that represents Asia Development Alliance, and Pradeep representing the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. And these are who will be our speakers today. Tomorrow, it will be session 2 on Africa. We have a great lineup of speakers as well, also researchers who have been researching the Africa region, and they will be sharing with us their assessments of the findings of the topic as well. And these are our speakers. So please come back for this session tomorrow. And then tomorrow, after our second session, we have a special session. And this is a partnership with the civil society pillar of the Community of Democracies. And they will be holding a special session on disinformation against women in public life, a threat to democracy. The objective is to raise awareness on how disinformation against women in public life hinders decision-making processes to build resilient and inclusive democracies. And there will be 3 panelists who are experts in governance and gender equality. So please stay on a little bit longer tomorrow for that session as well. And then on the third day, we will bring all of this together. We will have an Asia-Africa global perspective and see how African and Asian CSO engagement and advocacy it affects global governance. And we will have, we'll see international comparative analysis, assessment of SDGs, and kind of overall seeing how we could all work together for global governance. And these are the speakers for tomorrow or on the third day. And then we will close. That was a brief of the agenda. And finally, I will show the recommendations. I was asked to share with all of you the recommendations that were, let's see here. Let me share this screen. So hopefully it's big enough for everyone to see here. Currently, there's a draft recommendations for actions based on the research that has been conducted by the researchers. This will be ongoing. The recommendation addresses SDGs, COVID-19, democracy, civic space, as well as CSO international engagement on these issues as an outcome document to this forum. These recommendations were formulated based on the research outcome conducted by the researchers, as well as various international civil society statements on SDGs, democracy, and civic space. If you would like to give your input and suggestions, please do. We want to make this a democratic process for everyone to give their input. And it'll be open until 8 p.m. Bangkok time, Wednesday, October 27th. So as on the 28th, we'll be presenting the outcomes. Please send your suggestions to this email, 21addf@gmail.com, or to anselmo@ali7080@gmail. So I'll just kind of briefly show you the document. This is how the recommendations look like to governments, to CSOs, based on these themes. Just go through this, of course. And you could find this document on our ADN's website, in which Karel will share the link in the chat. Great. So please feel free if you have any suggestions you want to make on these recommendations. We'll go ahead and take it take them until Wednesday. All right. Great. So that's it for me. Thank you. I'll give you back the floor, Karel. Thank you. It was great. It was a pleasure. And I wish everyone a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And now we proceed to the main meat of our discussion today. I would like to hand the floor to Mr. James Gomez, who will be moderating the session on for day one. So I hand the floor to you, Mr. Gomez, and you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
great. Hope all of you are excited. Just to kick off, I've been tasked to, give you a top line of some of the key stats covering Asia. I have about 30 over slides, but I'm not going to land on every page. I will just like Sue has said earlier, just to show that this document is available and that you can access it if you want to do a deep dive on the statistics. So I'll just spend a few minutes on this before getting onto the main event. So I'm just trying to work this. Okay. So we have, basically comparative data about SDGs, COVID-19, democracy, civic space, and press freedoms. They are taken from a range of international reports, and these are all sort of enumerated here, and you can access them at your own leisure. These are also additional links where you can do a deep dive on all the international data available. And here's another set. Now, this is the region that we covered, Asia. There are 29 countries in total that has been subdivided by the 4 sub-regions. These are the breakdowns, and the individual sub-regional researchers may allude to some of the countries they have covered as they take the floor. Now, again, some of the data has come from the Sustainable Development Report, which is also available for your access. Here, a range of colors, but I think the key takeaway really is, as far as the SDGs are concerned, real progress is really the one indicated in green, but you can see we have a lot of red, orange, and yellow, which simply states there are various degrees of challenges across the regions. And similarly, you can see that in terms of indexes, a lot of the colors, around the globe remain, ice cold blue or light blue, which simply means, progress is still left to be desired. Similarly, a range of colors, again, to deep dive and to let you know the progress is not that great as each of the individual researchers will tell you. Here we are looking at the region, and you can see again, there are different scales, and a lot of them, fall below 100. So, which again, does not mean the region is doing too well. Being 100 being, a bit of a challenge, really. Similarly, there are varying levels of progress across the region. And once again, these are just top line information for you to have a sense of where you can find them. Once again, this is the index on the UPR. Just a quick glance to the left of the screen, you will see that different regions have different levels of acceptation of recommendations. You'll find that in Southeast Asia, it's very stark. The range can be up to 50% to as high as 95%. Similarly, in Northeast Asia and elsewhere, and this becomes clearer when we look at the democratic and political profile of the countries. Similarly, again, an indication of how the different countries have stepped up to submit the VNRs in particular. All countries in the region have submitted at least one, and a range of them have been able to submit two. This again across the different regions. COVID-19, figures are something that we are well aware of, but in short, I think Asia still is not doing very well. one of the things that we found out was that the level of infections and deaths are quite high in Asia, simply because the level of vaccinations are low in proportion. Asia still sort of lags behind many of the other parts of the world. So again, some numbers here, and they simply correlate to what I just said. There's an inverse relationship between the level of vaccination and the number of infections and deaths. So moving along, these continue to be figures related to COVID-19, and now we come on to the democracy index. In short, I think across the next few slides, what you will see is, if we look at the sub-regions, and this will come clearly in the articulation of the sub-regional researcher, is really that where we see some kind of democratic progress or consistency is really in Northeast Asia, countries like Japan, and South Korea, at times also Mongolia. But the other parts, the other sub-regions, they are lackluster. And this impacts, in terms of the progress for SDGs, especially around goal 16. It's similar again, this time just that the colors are different. We see a lot of red and orange. Orange especially shows you authoritarian regime. And if you look across regions, you will see more green, which is a little bit more positive in Northeast Asia compared to the other sub-regions. Similarly, also in terms of civic space, you will find that, there are interregional differences. And this is something that you want to kind of keep your eye and ear open as the colleagues from the different regions discuss. Similarly, with press freedoms as well, they seem to be consistent. So an impact in one area of rights, clearly has ripple effects across other areas. So if we zoom out, and we look at democracy as a whole, this is where it stands. So, so ending up towards the participation, we find that a range of initiatives where Csos participate either at the global or Asia level. But one of the key takeaway really is, how impactful have been, the participation of Asian CSOs at the international and regional level, and can they make any effective progress in implementing SDGs, especially in the context of this juncture that we have experienced during COVID-19. I hope that has served as a bit of a warm-up for you, so that we can get all excited for the presentation. So we have 4 speakers who will be reacting to a range of questions that I have prepared in advance. First, we have Inkara Mukatova from Kazakhstan, and she'll be focusing her discussion around Central Asia. We have Gopal Sivakoti, supported with Arzu from Nepal and covering South Asia. We have Ku Yinghui from Malaysia, and she will be covering Southeast Asia, and Aoi Horiyuchi from Japan, who will be covering Northeast Asia. So in the order that I've named the speakers, here is my first question, starting with you, Inkara. How did the COVID-19 pandemic broadly impact your sub-region? Please share with us briefly some key highlights.
Thank you, James. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes, loud and clear, Inkara.
Thank you. Well, I think with almost 2 years of COVID presence in our lives, we can more or less assess the impact of it had on our lives. I would say the pandemic had a multiple hit. One of the main issues raised by the pandemic was the state of healthcare system. I think as the experience in different countries shows, the health system in general was not ready for the spread of the new virus, regardless of the economic development and political situation in the country. Also, the pandemic has led to a massive changes in economies and labor markets, especially in Central Asia, because the majority of businesses, they started to close their doors, which followed by massive job losses. And I think just in a very short run, the pandemic resulted in increase of in poverty and food insecurity in the region, interrupted educational attainment, and exaggerated existing inequalities. Yes, well, in brief, I think that's the.
Thank you very much, Chinkara. So now over to either Arzu or Gopal, your observations from South Asia.
Thank you so much, James. I think I shall be speaking first on behalf of my team alongside Dr. Gopal Krishna Shivakoti and Ms. Srizana Pokhrel. COVID-19, which has been termed as one of the worst human and economic crisis of our lifetime, has not just created impact on South Asia, but it has impacted the world as a whole. But if we are to see its impact on South Asia, it has created both social as well as economical impact in South Asia. So first of all, I'd like to highlight the economic impact that the COVID-19 has created in South Asia. The economic growth rate of South Asia was estimated to be by plus 6.1% before the outbreak of COVID-19. However, after the outbreak of COVID-19, it has fallen down to minus 2.2% with a substantial decrease by 8.8%. So this gives us an overall overview of the situation or economic impact that COVID-19 has created in South Asia. Now, moving on to the social impact, the most impacted area has to be the education sector, because many children in South Asia are largely, education of South Asian children are largely impacted by COVID-19, which is evinced from the fact, from the recent report that has been released by UNICEF. It reveals that more than 400 million children in South Asia has been impacted by COVID-19, which is the data is 800 million children in Asia has been impacted by children's education has been impacted by COVID-19, whereas 50% of the data has been accounted to South Asia alone. So this again gives us an overview of how COVID-19 has created impact on the education sector. Moving on to the other social impact, the one thing that we need not forget is the skyrocketing cases of gender-based violence and disproportionate job loss in South Asia. The UN Women has recently revealed the fact that among other South Asian states, India and Nepal has been facing large amount of gender-based discrimination, gender-based violence amid pandemic. To give a brief data, 90% of the women working in informal and home-based jobs has been impacted by COVID-19 in Nepal and India alone. And apart from that, India has even been operating 700 one-step crisis centers in support or to mitigate this gender-based discrimination, the gender-based violence that has been skyrocketing amid pandemic. However, other sectors are also impacted by COVID-19. For instance, there is a rise of hunger and threatened food security. But on a lighter or on a positive note, the COVID-19 cases has been decreasing at present in South Asia. So hopefully this situation will be mitigated once the situation normalizes. Thank you.
Thank you, Arzu, for your thoughts on South Asia. Yinghui, over to you on Southeast Asia, please.
Thank you very much, James. I think in the region, in the sub-region of Southeast Asia, there's a few trends that I observe. there's 5 trends here that I would like to mention. The first trend is quite similar as well, not only happened in Southeast Asia, but also other sub-regions, I believe, in the whole Asia, is that the significance of the inequalities that happens. I think that is very strongly linked with the SDG stand that we also talk about. And the inequalities not only happens in the economic sections, but also the social side, similarly with what Azu mentioned about the education and so forth. So cutting across the 11 countries, we have 2 of the top wealthiest countries. We have Brunei and Singapore. And then, but at the same time, we have some of the poorest countries in the world, like Timor-Leste, Laos, and so forth. So those are the inequalities issues. And the second thing is that what happened in Southeast Asia during this COVID times, I think it triggered up the more debates relating to democracy versus authoritarian regimes, which kind of political regimes that actually guarantee or can provide even more equitable healthcare. But I think within these spectrums of speaking about democracy versus authoritarian, that blurred out how to say, it enhanced the challenges by the human rights CSOs, especially when they want to use the human rights language, because democracy no longer guarantees healthcare and so forth, as we see in the sub-regions. So I think the values of the good governance has been increased, and there's a lot more talking about good governance is very crucial. And my second point is about the issues of data credibilities and availability. I think cutting across the 11 Southeast Asian countries, there has been quite a lot of issues regarding, whether Indonesia is sending out that's the right number of COVID-19 cases in the countries, or even in a country like Malaysia and many other countries as well, including for countries such as Cambodia. So the data issues is being raised at the same time. And I think my fourth observation is about the challenge to CSOs that I briefly mentioned. I think we are in the juncture where we look at the right to health versus the other civil political rights, such as right to protest, assemble, and things. So this has been raised about individual versus collective rights. Not only we see, I mean, the situations that happen in US is directly reverse in what happens here in this sub-region. So that's something that I think imposes a lot of challenges to CSOs, especially those working on the human rights. And my last observations coming from the perspective of international relations, because I think with the 11 countries and with their vaccination program, and also from the which vaccination that they are taking, shows the inclinations of which power that they are moving into. So as we know, in the sub-region in Southeast Asia, we're talking about, always about US versus China. So I think some countries, for instance, what I observed in Timor is that when they received the Sinovac, the very first that they received was AstraZeneca. The second, when they received the Sinovac, there was actually a lot of media coverage with it. And I think the same thing goes to Cambodia as well. So those are the interesting trends that can observe under the COVID-19 in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much, James.
Yeah, thank you, Ying-Hui. Now over to Aoi from your perspective on Northeast Asia.
Thank you, James. Yes, the Northeast Asia is a somewhat particular sub-region where China and Russia, who developed their own vaccine against COVID-19, almost for the first time in the world. However, I think I'd like to highlight the impact of COVID-19 to these regions in terms of civic freedom or civic space, because on the economic and the social impacts are quite, I think it's globally, it's in the common challenges. But in terms of civic space, according to Civic's monitor, in this Northeast Asian sub-region, this is the only sub-region in Asia where the civic space is open or narrowed. I mean, the countries which is open and narrowed are included. Namely, Japan and South Korea is categorized narrowed, while Taiwan is open. and Mongolia is obstructed, and Russia is replaced, and China and North Korea, DPRK, is closed. So in terms of civic space situations, Northeast Asia is quite is diverse, or it's in quite different situations. So, and we also see the report, according to Civic's monitor, that the authoritarian regime or the governments try to ban the people to get the access to information about COVID-19, or fake put the fake news on the internet or the news outlets. So the governments are trying to shut down the assembly try to obstacle the people to right to hold a peaceful assembly. So in somewhat trying to close down the civic space. So I think it should be highlighted that in this sub-region, civic space is quite severely influenced by COVID-19. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just now probe the speakers on a few points, with a special dive into some of the specific SDG and the implementation and progress. So I'm going to pick a leaf up from what Arzu mentioned. She mentioned education, and then she connected it with children and women, and then she developed the idea of women and their impact, as well as the consequences of being denied participation in the informal economy. So pulling and trying to develop the impact on women, connecting it to SDG 5. Inkara, I want to just start with you, and I'll come back also to you, Yinghui and Aoi, to develop this point. Inkara, from this data you were looking, and the weekly meetings we had, and the several countries that you looked at in your region, can you share with us your observation about how COVID-19? I mean, you highlighted the issue of education and children. What kind of impact did it have, for women in relation to education, children, looking after the home, as well as what Arzu was mentioning in terms of the impact from the informal economy? Give us a spotlight on what was happening or is happening in Central Asia.
Thank you, James. Well, I think the overall trend in general in Central Asia in terms of gender equality does not look promising. We can say that to a certain extent, Kazakhstan, among other 5 countries, is better than the other countries, but still it's quite a low performance on gender equality, because despite extensive efforts made by the governments to achieve gender equality, empower women and girls, they still continue to be subjected to discrimination, violence, which was increased during the pandemic, and they denied a full realization of their human rights. And I think also gender parity in labor force, participation, and the average number of years of education of women in our region is still quite low. In addition, there was increase of violence, as I said, and women's burden of providing unpaid care work further increased during the pandemic, and of course, disproportionately exposed women to lose of their income and jobs and livelihoods.
Yeah, Inkara, just still on Central Asia. There are 5-6 countries there that you are looking at. Was there anything unique or special in terms of the points you just made, in particular to 1 or 2 countries from the sub-region that you are covering?
In terms of gender equality or the economic, I think Kazakhstan was the first country in the region to officially recognize the COVID-19. It has some governmental programs and initiatives to support the most vulnerable communities, I think was the only country which has some cash payment during the pandemic when people lose their normal jobs because all of the small businesses were closed. But so far, the other countries demonstrated quite a low performance.
Thank you, Inkara. So on the same point, Ying-Hui, your thoughts and observation on Southeast Asia?
On the SDG 5, yeah, James?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think cutting across when we are using this Sdgs and Sustainable Development Index that looking at the 2017 to 2020. Interestingly, Vietnam is considered one of the best in terms of their score when it comes to SDG 5, and Malaysia is one of the lowest, in fact, together with Cambodia. And of course, for the case of Brunei, especially the data is always not available when it comes to gender equalities. And what is also interesting that I observe that is not available via the data across the region is that while there's a lot of discussions and debates regarding about, gender-based violence, I think gender-based violence is not only happening in Southeast Asia, but cutting across many other sub-regions as well, and even I think globally as well. And I think one of the areas that perhaps the civil society organizations sometimes overlook is the specific groups of women. Meaning I have come across articles that related to pregnant women, articles related to female factory workers. So they all face different challenges in their own capacities. So I think those are the areas that are happening in the sub-region that is in Southeast Asia that I think require a lot more attention while we talk about gender equality, which different women in different capacities face different issues. I think those are things that we perhaps need to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ying-Hui, for nuancing the observation there. Aoi, your sort of analysis of what you picked up for Northeast Asia.
Thank you. Yes, according to SDSN Index in 2021 dashboard, gender equality in this sub-region, Northeast Asia, not all the countries have achieved this SDG goals 5. And significant challenges or major challenges remain in almost all the countries. And while some other researchers have explained that domestic violence is quite severe situation in this region as well, but I think the COVID-19 has also revealed that the worsening situation before the COVID-19, before the pandemic, in this sense, the domestic violence, this actually COVID-19 increased the number of cases of domestic violence in this sub-region and also in the global as well. But quite a strange situation in this sub-region is that half of the countries trying not to face these issues seriously. For example, China has published the second voluntary national review this year, 2021. But they have never mentioned about gender equality in the report. And also DPRK has also published the first VNR this year, but they insisted that gender equality is achieved already, but which should not be the true. And in Russia, there are some cases that domestic violence is reported, but there is no special bodies exclusively dedicated to equality and fighting gender discrimination. So in this context, I think the gender-based violence is quite severe in the Northeast Asian sub-region, and there should be more room for improvement. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Aoi, for putting the spotlight on gender-based violence, the observations you had from Northeast Asia. I'm coming to you, Azu, asking you to perhaps develop on the points on gender that you took the outline in the beginning. But I would also want to follow up with you after you spend a minute or two elaborating on that, to develop a point that Aoi mentioned in his first intervention, which was really around democracy, civic space, and squarely on one other indicator, which is SDG 16. So I would like you to first perhaps provide us a layer of what you started off, which is the observation of, gender and its impact. You specifically mentioned the informal economy and challenges there. So give us a minute or two in terms of an elaboration, and then perhaps outline, your thoughts on or observation. And Gopal, you're welcome to come in if the voice allows, on SDG 16, particularly issues related to democracy, human rights, and civic space. I'll come back to the rest of the speakers similarly on the same point. So over to you, Asu.
Thank you, James. So in South Asia, gender inequalities, gender discrimination and inequalities lies as two major and two common problems. And this brings us down to analyzing the situation of SDG 5, which is promotion of gender equality amongst other 17 goals, right? So if we are to see the data of STSN, the SDG index, then we can see that the situation of gender equality, the major challenges still remains stagnant apart from in Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. However, we did not just rely on one data. This is the one data that we have opted to, but then we also opt to the gender gap index. So while analyzing the gender gap index, which is exclusively based on the economic participation of a woman, education attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment of a woman, sadly, no other state apart from Bangladesh stands as top 100 countries with less gender disparity in South Asia. So this gives us a brief overview that the situation of gender inequality is still skyrocketing, and it's still not properly addressed in South Asia, right? So just to briefly talk about gender discrimination and the gender disparity that South Asia has been experiencing in form of, be it education attainment of a women or political participation of a women, the major challenges are still stagnant, and South Asia needs to work a lot, possibly and perhaps on the capacity building or economic empowerment of a women. So moving on to your next question, James, about SDG 16, which is based on the 11 indicators. If we are to see the STSN index, the situation of SDG 16 is quite concerning in South Asia, because no other state apart from Bhutan has been progressing efficiently in terms of the achievement of SDG 16 in South Asia. The major challenge is still stagnant in all other South Asian country apart from Bhutan. However, Bhutan is doing pretty decent. The situation of SDG 16 is right on track in Bhutan, but apart from Bhutan, no other country has been progressing enough or in a rapid speed that the country should have been by now. So the situation is quite concerning in South Asia. So this brings me down to your the I guess third part of the question about civic space and democracy in South Asia. The civic space in South Asia is either repressed or obstructed. So no country in South Asia have open civic space. And this basically signifies three things. First is that the civic space is contested by the power holders. Second is that the full enjoyment of fundamental rights is hurdled, and there is existence of a fear of surveillance, harassment, and even death while criticizing power holders in South Asia. So this is the situation of South Asia in terms of civic spaces. And following Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan, recently Afghanistan has also been enshrined under the watch list by Civicus. Now let me move on to the situation of democracy. And when I present my analysis on the situation of democracy, I am largely relying on the data of IDEA International, followed by EUI Democracy Index, which is whose analysis is based on the electoral process and functioning of the government, political participation, and civil liberties in South Asia. So based on these two data, it is quite safe to say that South Asia has been experiencing light and shadow democracy since very long now. No country in South Asia has been experiencing full democracy. Sadly, not even India, which has been recognized and which has been time and again being called as having the world's largest democracy. So even India, followed by Sri Lanka, have flawed democracy, and other countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh has been experiencing a hybrid regime since last 5 years, whereas Afghanistan has been experiencing an authoritarian regime. And we can only imagine the situation after the Taliban's takeover that has recently taken place in Afghanistan. So I guess I answered your 3 parts of the questions. I would love to hear from other speakers as well.
Thank you, Arzu. Thank you, Arzu. And if we all recall, the color index that I shared with you from the various indices, which you also have included in your analysis, it does put South Asia in a sort of a regressed, situation. So on that note, the color coding for Central Asia is also, it's bright in the sense that they are bright colors, but not the kind of colors that we want. Inkara, give us an insight into SDG 16, and if you can also perhaps, share with us the nuances vis-a-vis the different countries in Central Asia. Over to you, Inkara.
Thank you, James. Well, as in many regions of Asia, according to Civic's monitor, if we talk about the civic space in Central Asia, there is no open country in the region. Civic space in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are also rated as abstracted. And I think moreover in 2019, Kazakhstan has been added to a global watch list of countries that have recently seen some serious and rapid decline in fundamental rights. Kyrgyzstan is also rated as abstracted, but this is the only country exception in the region in terms of democracy, because 4 out of 5 countries in Central Asia are rated as non-democracies with authoritarian regime, but the only exception is Kyrgyzstan, taking some recent amendments and changes. Tajikistan is rated as a repressed countries, and with 2 remaining countries, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, rated as closed, which is the most serious category by the Civicus. In terms of democracy, I think for a long time now, countries in Central Asia, they have filled all the possible lower ranks in the democracy indices and reports, with the only exception, as I mentioned, for Kyrgyzstan. But the existing problems the Kyrgyzstan is facing now, the Kyrgyz parliament, worsened by the 2016 referendum, adoption of new constitution, which is leading the country back to a presidential system, is also bringing the country closer to authoritarian regime. I think it's quite worsening because democracy and civil society in Kyrgyzstan, this is not just a matter of this country, but it was as a model for the Central Asia region. Uzbekistan has recently experienced major reforms, and I think, but nevertheless remains as a authoritarian country, probably because the reforms undertaken are not sufficient so far. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you really, sort of showed up the difference between the different countries. Yinghui, you have 11 countries, not an easy job. Tell us, your take on SDG 16, democracy, human rights, and civil society, civic space.
Okay. Thank you, James. Yeah, actually, I myself was quite surprised when coming to the statistic when it comes to, the top SDGs focus in the UPR. And one of the top one is actually on SDG 16, meaning most of the countries are actually putting SDG 16 at a focus. But I mean, if we look at the democracy EIU index, as well as the civic space index among the 11 countries, with perhaps the exceptions of Timor-Leste and also Malaysia, because of the political change in 2018, the rating has gone up, but nevertheless, we will not we will perhaps see the downgrade when it comes to the civic space for Malaysia with the political instability that happened here. So for me, there's a mismatch over there when the ratings for civic space and the democracy is rather not that promising, but the top UPR recommendation and also the concerns of the countries are actually on the SDG 16. So that gives me the observations of actually the doubt in terms of data. So I think that perhaps also linked to the skepticism, especially coming from the civil societies organizations in terms of the local NGOs. In looking at SDGs, the regional and the international NGOs look at SDGs in a different way, like what we are doing now. But I think when we go for local NGOs, not national, local NGOs, I think the emphasis on the SDGs is not really that positive, and they're thinking that those data is not really a reflection of what is really happening, and especially looking at the SDG 16, so it will be very strange. And if I may pick a few examples, for instance, countries, there are a few countries, for example, like Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia. I think the SDG 16s are normally can be scored quite high because of the assistance coming from the international actors. So I think in the sub-regions, we cannot dismiss the role of the foreign aid, the role of the international actors that somehow assisting that sort of glorifying the rating of the country, which for me, it can actually send a reverse kind of message to the people, because it can be very beautiful in their report, but it might not be really it might not be a realities on the ground. I think with that, I concur with the sentiments of the local NGOs that SDGs perhaps is not really a document that they want to really have focus on with all the indicators and the targets, and yet the national reports, I think we look at the VNR reports, they are all very glorifying and beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yuan Hui. I think one of the things that we observed over the last couple of months when we were all working together is the issue of data. So on that note, I also want to pause for a cause here and advertise once again and remind everybody we have part 2 of the Asia Africa Democracy Forum that will look at Africa tomorrow. That's 4 to 6 p.m. Bangkok time, and we will look at a sort of a regional global perspective, on the 28th, also at 4 to 6 p.m. The bonus is I'll be speaking and I will be doing a deep dive on some of the issues around data. So look out for those 2 events tomorrow and day after. Now I'll come back to Aoi on Northeast Asia. You're the first to develop the idea on democracy, human rights, civic space. Your thoughts, because in Northeast Asia, the disparity is so wide in terms of democratic, authoritarian countries. So please share with us your observation. SDG 16.
Thanks, James. Yes, similar to civic space. In terms of SDG goal 16, in Northeast Asia sub-region is actually divided or in disparity. According to SDSN Index 2021, while China and Mongolia and Russia has major challenges remains in goal 16, and China and the Republic of Korea challenges remains, and to my surprise, Japan is seem to be achieved SDG goal 16. So I think Japan is I think one of the only country in Asia, the whole Asia region, that according to SDSN, SDG 16 is achieved. But in reality, I cannot fully agree with this result. So this actually came up to my mind that the skepticism on the data. For example, like media, if you look at the media freedom index, Japan is not actually doing good. While Republic of Korea and Mongolia is actually the rank is better than Japan, and during the pandemic, in Japan, the press conference by the prime minister or the health ministers, the number of journalists who can attend this press briefing is actually limited because of this infection, in order to prevent the COVID-19 infections. So, but I think that this situation is actually the threat to the people's right to access to information. And what is worse is that even those journalists who could attend the press briefing, they can only ask questions once. They are not allowed to ask the multiple questions. Even the prime ministers or health ministers did not answer the correct properly. So I think in terms of press freedom, Japan is actually in a severe situation, but also it's, I think the same situation can be said in other countries in the sub-region. Thank you.
Thank Aoi. Now I want to put on notice Joshna and Pradeep. I'm going to come to you in 2 minutes. So just to give you a heads up so that I'm coming to you to get your input. But before that, a quick fire round. Each speaker, you have about 30 to 45 seconds. And my question is this: what specific challenges did COVID-19 place on achieving SDGs? I'll give you 15 seconds to think about it. What specific challenges did COVID-19 place on achieving SDGs in your region? This is a quick fire round, 30 to 45 seconds. Inkara, starting with you.
Thank you, James. Well, I think definitely there are some challenges, but I wouldn't say that COVID in general eliminate all the progress that has been done by the countries from 2015, but definitely it consistently reduced them. I think one of the alarming statistic was that in Central Asia, the highest percentage of non-attending the schools by children, and also labor income losses and sub-region increased by almost like 10%. And also I think that this inequality in terms of digital technologies, which are like quite mainstreamed at this time, it's exaggerating existing this inequalities and affects this online learning and just like receiving services, digital services.
Okay.
Briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Inkara. You touched on about 2 or 3 disruptive points right there. Similarly, 30 to 45 second quick fire. Arzu, your thoughts on the key things that impacted in South Asia?
So I want to note one interesting observation that I've come across during the course of our research, James. So there is this report, 2020 SDG report of UN, and it enshrines that no country in the world was on the track to meet the target by 2030, even before pandemic, right? So after pandemic, I'm just going to talk about one important challenge or one thing that have disrupted the entire process, slowed down the entire process of achievement of SDG, and that has to be economic downfall, overall economic downfall, because achievement of any SDG sustainable development goal, be it 1 or 16 or 10 or 5, state needs some form of resources, state needs some form of financial expenditure, and given the fact that the economy has largely been disrupted in South Asia because of COVID pandemic, I'll just give one example. The Standard Charter SDG investment map has estimated that India alone requires the investment of $2.6 trillion to meet its sustainable development goal by 2030. So one challenge that COVID-19 has created in the achievement of a sustainable development goal is the overall economic downfall of South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Arzu. Now over to you, Yinghui, your observation.
Yeah, a very quick one. I think I see COVID-19 as an opportunities for the region, especially actually my points is related to what Arzu said on the economic side. I think COVID-19 trigger a lot more debates on the realities that happen, that is the economic injustice and the wrong models that the governments across the sub-regions are using. And that itself, COVID-19 has basically exacerbated the inequalities coming from the people. So, and including, I think, the bad treatments with the migrants and the refugees in some of the countries, because this sub-region, Southeast Asia, we have receiving and we have sending countries. So there is these tensions within there. So I think COVID-19 is a good sign, a good sign as in to send alarming signals to the governments of the 11 countries that something has to be done with the economic injustice that's happening.
Great. Thank you. I mean, Azu, Inkarai, Ingwe, you both, in different ways pulled out the economic impact of COVID-19 and, and its contribution in, stagnating or regressing the achievement of SDG. How similar or different is it in Northeast Asia, Aoi?
Thanks. My suggestion is that the COVID-19 has put challenges on achieving SDGs is that preparedness by the government. For example, like if you cannot attend school face to face, usually the education system go online. But in most of the sub-regions, not digital education is enough improved. So because the government was not prepared for that. And just like disaster risk reductions, I think preparedness is a key when severe situations such as COVID-19 pandemic happens. So what is at stake is that if the government is prepared for the next pandemic or bad situation. Thanks.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move away from the core speakers, the researchers from the different sub-region, and turn our attention to the two discussants. Let me first introduce the discussant. First, we have Josna Mohan, representing Transparency, Accountability, and the Participation Network, as well as the Asian Development Alliance. And also we have Pradeep Baisag, representing Global Call to Action Against Poverty. Now, before I invite Josna first, one of the things that came across the several weeks of interaction with everyone from both the Asia and Africa sub-region is really the role of CSOs in progressing the SDG in spite of the inherent challenges. So give us an insight, Josna, the work that you're doing, and specifically what kind of actions CSO can take to kind of push their governments along to progress on the SDG that seemingly has either stagnated or regressed in the last few years. Josna, over to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me in this important forum. And it was nice to hear all the discussions, which are I'm very intrigued. And of course, we have been doing studies and research on SDG 16 and 16 plus as civil society organizations, and trying to incorporate data and information from across the Asia. The role of CSOs is very important, James, and we have all been working. It's pity to see that SDG 16 is stagnated or is actually regressing in almost all part of Asia. So, and you will see that you'll also find that no BNR so far has ever talked about the enabling environment, so it itself shows how much they are concerned about the issues of civil society. And then we see the human right, the issues of human rights, and especially those who are working in these issues are always at the forefront, and there have been lots of abuses we have seen during the COVID times. So what we have been doing as civil society, we have been part of Asia Pacific regional CSO mechanism, which is called APRCM. We have been advocating for the issues of civil society across Asia and Pacific since 2013 actually. And we have been coming up with the CSO statements on behalf of civil society, which we present during the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development in March, and then again during High Level Political Forum. We have a very good mechanism, I would just say, from the civil society at the regional level, even at the global level, we can say, but at the national level, this is something, the voices are missing. So how do we strengthen the voices of civil society at the national level? Because VNR, when we talk about it, these are the national processes. So definitely we need to work more with the other stakeholders, with the government and the private sector, academia, of course, with civil society. But then this is something, the whole multi-stakeholder mechanism is missing. And then definitely we talk about the systemic approach. There's a lack of political will, which we have seen. Then there's a lack of data. So from the civil society, we say that there is no lack of data. There's a lot of qualitative and quantitative data at the micro and at the macro level. They are available. We have been also encouraging the civil society to come up with their parallel report or the spotlight reports, which has a lot of good data. We have been training in ADA, we have been training with our fellow members and with other partners like TAP, Forest, APST, A4ST, and the Civicers, they play a very important role when we all gather together, and GCAP. So we have been doing a lot of training in capacity building, which we call Gala, and we do capacity building on SDGs. And then, but what's again another sad thing which we see 6 years down the line, and we are still talking about the capacity building on SDGs. So this is again, when we talk, it's a bottom-up approach, and why it is missing, why people do not know the SDGs. Still, we need to do the capacity building for the CSOs. So this is another point that I would wanted to highlight. And then, so we have been part of the Democracy Forum with ADN, and then this year we organized our SDG 16+ forum, which was based on various reports that ADA has come up in the last 3 years on shrinking civic space, or the issues of democracy and the human rights, and how link them together. And then we partnered with Janik and our national member, and then with, of course, with Forest and TAP Network, and we did the Democracy SDG 16+ forum. So what we have seen that, of course, in Asia, especially the South Asia, the region where we have seen much more regressed civil society, and especially what happened on the 1st of February in the form of Myanmar coup, or later on 15th of August in Afghanistan. So on the basis of that, we organized our civil society SDG 16+ forum, and we came up with a declaration. So I would not go into the detail of what we did in the declaration, but definitely I would just like to pinpoint some of the highlights that we really wanted everyone to listen to. And if you all agree, you can endorse, which was that to reform the international peace architecture as articulated in our common agenda, which is recently published by the UN Secretary General, establish an official annual multi-stakeholder SDG 16+ forum in Asia, thus demonstrating policy leadership to other region, increase the provision of international development finances through the World Bank and the IMF to enhance peace, human rights, democracy, and the governance in Asia region. The existing Asian Development Bank, including the new Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructural Bank, and the Asian Development Bank, should also mobilize and increase funding for people-centered development and SDG 16+ in the region, promote true peace and human security in the region, and the full realization of all human rights enshrined in the International Bill of Human Rights, which includes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, establish a UN regional human rights review mechanism for Asia based on existing models in other regions, and then establish immediate access and safe havens for the millions of civilians fleeing unjust rule, including from Myanmar and from Afghanistan, where legitimate fears exist about revenge killings and the violent suppression of women and other vulnerable communities. So these are some of the demands that we have put forward, and I will just put the link to the whole declaration. You can access the declaration, and if you all agree, you can also endorse the declaration, which will be a sign of solidarity for all of us. So with this, if you have anything else I could add, please let me know. Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you, Josna, for your passionate and hard work in this area. Once again, everyone here on the call, please take note of the link to the declaration that Josna is sharing. We welcome your support and endorsement. Josna, I will come back to you with a question. Before I do that, I also want to put all the sub-regional researchers on notice that I'll be coming back to you after Pradeep's intervention to get your take on, CSO engagement around the SDGs in your respective region. So Pradeep, thanks for your patience all this while. Please tell us about your work and what's happening in terms of, CSO moving forward the SDG agenda. Over to you, Pradeep.
Thanks, James. Thanks, friends. So I think civil society is already doing quite a lot at different levels, addressing inequality, pushing for more democracy within the framework of Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030. Without it, many of us quite do not agree that SDG gives a 100% foolproof mechanism, but that's one mechanism which is definitely gives quite a lot of things that we demanded. And many of the inputs were taken during its framing, and eventually were constantly kind of engaged with it at different levels through different mechanisms like voluntary national review, then regional SDG forums, then the high-level political forum, etc. And we're doing it at the national, regional, and global level. Civil society is kind of quite intensely engaged in these processes, including GCAP, which I represent. But somehow down 4 or 5 years now, we realize that this is a mechanism which might look robust, but the monitoring mechanism is certainly not that good. That's one. Two, it could also be so that the agenda actually is more of a lip service for the governments, and in reality they could well do all the misdeeds and then cover up through the official mechanism called the voluntary national review. That's something we have been experiencing, and all my friends would agree who are engaged in voluntary national review that they are sugar-coated in most of the cases. Voluntary national reviews demanded a kind of critical reflection on the ways governance models are built, on the ways government is functioning. But unfortunately, what we have been seeing in all these fora, including the regional and high-level political forum, is saying that, okay, we are doing all good. So business as usual is something which is being done by the governments. Civil society has been quite active on questioning the ways things are formed. In Asia, I would agree to friend Josna that we have been given quite a lot of space in terms of engaging with the mechanisms. And a statement comes, we do quite 3-4 days of brainstorming, taking different communities together and come up with the statements. But James, this is not enough. Why? Because civil society is not an end in itself. Civil society inputs has to be taken into consideration, just not in statements, official statements, but also should be reflected in action. That's the missing point. At one point at the global level, I clearly remember in 2019 when we did the People's Assembly, the whole idea of People's Assembly came forth in 2018 toward 2019, where global civil society formations, the Action for Sustainable Development, Global Call to Action Against Poverty, many of us joined together, and continuous brainstorming went on, and a change of strategy was evolving. That probably civil society is not powerful enough to influence the governments at different levels. UN also has its limitations, how much influence it can bear on the government, and who, after all, verifies the veracity of the national reports that is being present in the high-level political forum. So, and there has also been paradox in both these big deals, Agenda 2030 and Paris Climate Deal. We have they speak about an overwhelming role of civil society, but when you come down to the national level, they don't like it. Therefore, at one hand, in legally you are entitled to engage. On the other hand, practice you are thrown out like anything. That's the shrinking civil society was already there. But in 2015, if you can mark it clearly, that because it's an international mandate for the countries to facilitate the civil society in their national processes, they are bound to do it because they have promised, but they're not willing to do it. So they find out different means and ways to kind of trample the rights, particularly the space given to civil society. So with that understanding, in 2019, we did the wider civil society coordinated by GCAP. We did the People's Assembly, parallel to the UN General Assembly, right in New York, bringing in the community voices to the fore. Clearly understanding is that we need a change of strategy now. Just civil society and civil society engagement is not going to cut the ice, bring the community to the fore. It is they who decide, choose their leaders. It's just not the global level, regional and national level. That's something we have been doing. And this time around, we did 30 to 35 national people's assemblies, subnational people's assemblies also. In Asia, we did in quite 7-8 countries. And the idea was that the community speaks up and civil society facilitates the process. Bring the community in face to face with the members of parliament, members of legislature, government who should be directly answering. So a form of accountability to the people, particularly the marginalized people, and then formulate your aspirations, issues in forms of demand charter, and send it across, highlight it, speak to the media, then send it across to the government, member of parliament, UN systems. That's something we have been doing. This time around, we also did at the national level, in regional level, Asia level, we did Asia Regional People's Assembly with 2021 civil society organizations, including ADN, ADA, Oxfam, ActionAid, then many of us. And we have prepared the Asia People's Demand Charter, which I'll touch upon, but we also did at the global level kind of 20-25 parallel sessions. And we found that civil society is taking interest. The wider civil society is taking quite a lot of interest with this change strategy of bringing people to the fore. And this is clearly also the voice coming from the national levels. Probably this is a right strategy, but do not leave this SDG vehicle, because this is a legal vehicle. So we'll use this SDG vehicle, but with a bit change of strategy, bring the people into the fore, civil society taking comparatively back seat, so that people actually, the real democracy is in operation. People asking questions to their legislatures or government officials who they are accountable to. And yeah, so James, I'll also touch upon the demands that in 2 minutes, if you want.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah,
okay,
please go ahead.
So, okay, very briefly only. I'll share the screen if that's okay with my friends here. So, okay, friends, these are the colleagues who kind of co-organize the Asia Regional People's Assembly. We're calling it now Asia People's Charter of Demand. Set of issues has already been discussed by other colleagues. Pandemic has exposed, and pandemic was in fact used by most of the governments to trample civil rights and invoke emergency clauses which were not meeting the international standards. The world has also failed countries like Afghanistan and Myanmar, where apart from the general human rights, women's rights are severely violated, and that was clearly coming in Afghanistan. Demand for the government, not only the UN systems, that protect the human rights of everyone through ensuring functioning democratic spaces and oversight institutions, And legislation should not be misused to silence the voice of minority, opposition parties, or to curb dissent. Recognize and protect the role of civil society in promoting human rights. So another is public health. That's where we have been demanding a free and universal vaccine, COVID vaccine, which has been developed by most of the private pharma, but in some cases also public institutions, but with a huge investment by the governments. We demand that this should not be monopolized by those private pharmas. They should not make huge profits by selling it. It's a pandemic. It's a question of people's lives, and the TRIPS waiver, trade-related intellectual property rights, should be waived on not only the COVID vaccines, but the array of diagnostics, medical equipments, etc., relating to COVID, so that we bring an end to the COVID. People should be given priority over profits, which unfortunately the rich countries and these big pharmas are not listening to. We are demanding this and bring in these vulnerable groups like the sex workers, the LGBTQI, person with disabilities, bring them into the fore while doing vaccination at the national level. So this is a set of demands that we are making, primarily on two. One, TRIPS waiver at the WTO, and second, at the national level, make it free and universal, and prioritize the marginalized groups. Civic space is something I'll not deal with. Josna has already dealt in detail with that. Justice is something which is causing a cause of concern. This is destroying the people's lives and livelihood, culture, knowledge, and skills. These extractive industries, mining and hydropower sectors, and these aggressive forms of development are affecting people of various marginalized groups, or more importantly, the indigenous groups, and in the process, the indigenous women's rights to self-determination in their old cultural, social development has been trampled with, has been curtailed due to this aggressive forms of development. Then income inequality and loss of livelihood. This is something we have already witnessed. Income has not gone down for the rich and elite. They have somehow managed to sail through. It is those poor people, the vendors, the small farmers, the say Dalit women who was doing domestic work in some or other houses. It is these people who have suffered, and leading to hunger deaths also. We have instances, and then demands are like this development, and so governments must develop national inequality reduction plan. That's something now they should consider and should put in place to address not only the economic inequality, but other forms of inequality like gender and social inequalities. Invest in public services, social protection, to inch toward universal social protection, and give as much protection to the people in the developing country. In the developed countries, we know they are quite robust. Protect wages of workers first, and inequality in wages, and the excessive profit and payouts, shareholder payouts, which are going to the shareholders and the corporate. There should be some way mechanism to redistribute to the workers through decent jobs, living wages, protecting the labor rights, etc. And then there are issues of exclusion of people availing the social services through digital divide. That is coming as yet another challenge. Across region, we see it. I'm from India, I see it very clearly. The digital divide is posing a big challenge and excluding the neediest group from getting social security. That's also we must demand. These UN systems, governments, they are forcing for adoption of digitization of everything that is dividing and excluding people who are neediest. So these are some of the issues and demands. The demands are primarily for the governments from the civil society endorsed by these 221 organizations. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Pradeep, and thanks to Joshna and Pradeep. You know, you have heard their work at the regional level, whether it's a declaration that Joshna has put together or a list of demand that Pradeep has raised. But I think central, and which comes to the heart of our conversation today, is really the role of CSOs. So now I would like to circle back to the sub-regional researchers to give us your take and observation on the role of the CSOs. If we sort of distill what Joshna and Pradeep have said, there's kind of a issue between whether CSOs, while articulating and amplifying their voice at the regional level, really can make an impact at the national level. And it's kind of, this or that. So I'll start with South Asia, Arzu, and my specific question really, and this is all for all the sub-regional researchers, is how effective are CSOs at the national level to move the SDG agenda forward, in spite of what we hear from the colleagues working at the regional level, creating platforms to amplify their voices. I'll start with you, Arzu.
Thank you, James. So there are basically two major intergovernmental regional organizations that has been working for, working to enhance the regional cooperation, that is SARC and BIMSTEC. If we are to be specific to South Asia. And sadly, none of these two intergovernment organizations has formally recognized any CSOs as such. However, under SARC, the CSOs, different CSOs collaboratively have been conducting People's SARC and have been submitting different declarations and different suggestions, be it for policy making or be it, for in the interest of the citizens of certain reason. They have been submitting the declarations and the suggestions and recommendations to the SARC. However, the SARC has not yet formally recognized People's SARC. And if we are to talk about BIMSTEC, we do not really have such scope or exclusive scope of CSO's participation in BIMSTEC. However, even BIMSTEC has been somehow giving space or giving a consultative role to CSOs or the regional at the regional level to provide their recommendations, especially in the policy making. So we can take an example of the progressive efforts like SARC law and different universities like SARC women universities that somehow promotes and somehow relates to SDG, SDG 4 and SDG 5, even SDG 16. Yeah, so no exclusive or formal recognition of these CSOs so far by the two major intergovernmental organizations in SARC, but the CSOs have been playing indirect or some role to give suggestion to this intergovernmental organization in the promotion and protection of people's rights, being specific to the Sustainable Development Goals. If Gopal sir wants to add something on this, then.
Well, I don't know whether my voice would allow to do that, but thank you, Arzu, for highlighting the role of the SARC and the BIMSTEC with regards to engagement of civil society organizations. Besides some of the formally recognized bodies within the SARC, there are institutions where there is a bit bigger role to play for civil society institutions and organizations. For example, there is a body called SAPMA, which is the South Asian Forum of Media Organizations, and also all electoral management bodies in South Asia have also come together, forming a group called FEMBOSA, in order to advance the civil society, in order to advance the electoral freedom, the issue of democratic elections, free, fair, and incredible elections in the region. So there are there are institutions from different level which have been very not so much formal, but they are working closely on their own in the region as a part of regional solidarity. And we're talking about civil societies in South Asia. Civil society is pretty robust and it's a very enthusiastic kind of rainbow coalition of different people from different professions that have time and again demanded the SARC, which is somehow in a coma stage now, to become more flexible, to be more democratic, more open, in order to accommodate the voice of the people through formal processes. So is with the BIMSTEC, but BIMSTEC doesn't include all nations from South Asia. It only covers 5 countries, and which is basically engaged in trade and environment and all business sector. So, but still, civil society are trying, to take their share with these 2 organizations. And talking about CSOs at national level, yeah, we have seen in most of the countries in the region, excepting few, that civil society organizations are the saving grace, both in terms of championing the cause of human rights and democracy and vis-a-vis the SDGs. There have been a series of kind of events and interaction and meetings and through different platforms which are going on a very routine basis in the region. We have seen that there have been optimized process by civil society organizations. They're the one who are knocking the doors of every ministries and related institutions and bodies and organs within the state about advancing the 2030 agenda, and are also pretty actively engaged in what we call the preparing an alternative report or shadow reports, both in terms of the international human rights instruments and even the pretty active there in the front line to prepare the report and even physically present before the different UN treaty bodies and amplify the cause. And also with regards to SDGs, there have been regular participation through their own civil society report in the high-level political forum from the region. So in sum, the civil society organization is pretty robust, pretty active, and of course not well resourced. But when you really look at the activism part of the civil society organization in South Asia, both at regional level through different alliances, and like for example, SAPI and People's Circle, and number of other initiatives. What we can say that there is a greater interaction among people is going on. Also in the peace process, also in the democratic front. So the media, the academia are also been very much a part of the civil society, initiative in the region. So the structured dialogues has been going on within ourselves and also with the different, wide area of government and non-governmental sector. Thank you. And I'm extremely sorry for my voice.
I think, James, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, Inkara, I'm coming to you. And really the question I want to investigate from the different interventions by Josna, Pradeep, and also Arzu and Gopal. Yes, civil society is active. But I think what we want to investigate, and which is the core of the project as well, but are they effective? So Inkara, from your observations in Central Asia, tell us, yes, they are active, but are they effective?
Yeah, thank you, James. Well, I think as was mentioned by the colleagues, the multi-stakeholder nature of the 2030 agenda demands enabling environment for participation by all, yeah? And to realize this, we definitely need an open and inclusive dialogues with governments, parliaments, civil society, citizens. In terms of Central Asia, I think in most of the Central Asian countries, there is a lack of diversity of types of CSOs that are engaged in such dialogues. I think, and these findings, of course, they demonstrate a non-compliance with international commitments made to ensure that CSOs should contribute. I think one of the things that prevent this, that the government, in Central Asia, governments largely decide which ones get to participate. In terms of their contribution, definitely civil society in the region, they work on localizing SDGs. They work on promoting citizen-centric collaborative governance, which of course at the end result in awareness raising about the SDGs, implementation, and I think with adequate technical support, they have this potential to play a proactive role in the promotion of the SDGs. But for your question about the meaningful participation, I think it's essential to promote an enabling environment so that they CSOs engage in responsive, inclusive, and representative decision making, as it's stated in SDG 16.
Okay, thank you very much, Inkara. I just before I go to Aoi and Yinghui for their take on CSO, just to point out there are a couple of questions, interventions also in the chat box, and I'll read a couple of them for you. One from Haga: can you please share some success stories to overcome the effect of COVID-19 on SDG 10? That other regions can learn from. I will direct that question perhaps to Arzu and Gopal if you want to answer that a little bit later. And also we have one question from Becky. Are there specific nuances on the call for the IFIs and MDBs to fund SDG 16? This is an open question. Anyone is welcome to answer. For the rest of you who are in the call, anytime, pop a question on the chat box or use the raise hand function. But I'll now, while I wait for the questions, I will now go to Yinghui. Yinghui, your take on, the effectiveness of, CSO in pushing forward the SDG agenda.
Thank you, James. I think in answering these questions, I would like to bring the discourse on the localizing of SDGs in the Southeast Asia. I think localization process is currently happening in several countries, as we spotted from the data. For instance, like in Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. What I would really like to highlight is the example from my own country, Malaysia itself. I think Malaysia sets a rather good examples when it comes to the localizations of SDGs. Nevertheless, I must emphasize that this is the initiative started from the CSOs, not from the government. So there is a difference when we talk about the role of the CSO or the role of governments in terms of the localizations. So this particular alliance is the where the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on SDGs, headed by CSOs, as well as what is very interesting with this APPGM is that it is a network that is not only with the CSO, but also we have member of parliaments. So what it follows is is taken from the model of a United Kingdom's parliament, where it is a body that being approved by the parliament, and however they operates as an interest group comprising members of both sides of the house. That means it doesn't only have the opposition, but it also have the government's member of parliaments as well, together with the CSOs. And I still recall that back then in 2015, when the CSOs Alliance, the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance, that was formed as early as 2015, when the government has not really talked about, the upcoming plans on the SDGs and so forth. They are already talking about it. And I remember I think back then in 2016 or so, we visited the Parliament House and we gave a briefing to the Member of Parliaments, and we received very negative comments coming from the Member of Parliaments and the skepticisms about the SDGs, not only from the governments, but including the oppositions. So there's this skepticisms coming from SDG as a UN documents. Why should we believe in that, with all the data and so forth? I think this stance is in line with what I have been repeatedly mentioned about the skepticisms coming not only from the governments, but also, the government, of course, they have to glorify their reports at the international levels with the BNR and so forth. But in terms of CSO, I think even for this APPMG, I must applaud the initiatives coming from the local NGOs, but nevertheless, the challenges also continue. And I think the other point before I conclude is that we need to recognize that the SDGs is not new. CSO have been working on all these goals before the SDGs, either MDGs or whatsoever. This is an added point of, how we want to plot in which SDG goals that we actually achieve. So I think we need to give the credits to the CSO who have been working on all this, but nevertheless, they might not be plotting whether they are working on SDG 5, gender equality, because for women's rights groups, they are all working on SDG 5. Just depends on whether that NGOs are using the language or using the documents of SDGs to label their advocacy work. So I think they should be included perhaps when we make analysis and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ying Hui. So before I get on to the two questions that were in the chat box, your quick reaction on the effectiveness and role of CSOs?
Okay, thank you. Yes, your questions about the effectiveness of civil society in Northeast Asia is quite actually difficult to answer because compared to other sub-regions, civil societies in this Northeast Asian sub-region is quite small, comparatively small. So we cannot say that civil societies effectively promote implementation of SDGs in this sub-region. However, the role of civil society is actually common wherever you are. I think I'd like to highlight that holding the government accountable is one of the key roles by civil societies. And in terms of VNR, out of 6 countries, 4 countries, Japan, Republic of Korea, and Mongolia, and Russia, there are civil society spotlight report towards government's VNR report. And there are civil society platform on promoting SDGs in 4 countries. So I think the civil society form themselves and try to hold governments accountable while analyzing by civil society themselves. And also, I heard from Russian colleagues that even though there's limited consultations by the government towards the crafting VNR in Russia 2020, after the VNR publications, the government realized that the role of civil society. So I think that VNR can be the game changer for the country and for the government, that they could realize the role of civil society. And I think civil society can use these opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you, Awi, and pointing out to the positive role of VNR in provoking CSO participation. So Arzu, I was coming to you with a question that was, put out by Hager, which is, can you please share some success story to overcome the effect of COVID-19, especially on SDG 10 that other regions can learn from? So if you can, from the survey, just perhaps pinpoint an example that we can throw up here.
Sure. So we do have so many good examples that we can learn from a few countries in South Asia. And to be specific to SDG 10, I think Bhutan has been doing quite good in terms of ensuring SDGs, despite the hurdles that has been created by COVID-19. So for an example, specific to SDG 16, there is this initiative called KIDU. It's a relief support initiative that has been formed in the initiation of His Majesty in Bhutan, which has been ensuring economic support and loan waiver to the vulnerable individuals, easing the economic difficulties. Similarly, other than that, economic contingent plan of Bhutan that has also helped a lot in ensuring or combating the economic inequalities. However, if you ask me about the total scenario of SDG 10 in South Asia, it was quite hard for us to find the data because STSN have the data constraint. The trend information is mostly unavailable in case of South Asia to analyze the situation of SDG 10. But for now, I can just give an example of Bhutan. If you ask me in terms of other SDGs, for an example, the countries like India, as well as Bhutan, as well as Nepal, has formed the health emergency operation centers to combat, to support the SDG 3 of its citizens, to ensure SDG 3 or to ensure right to health for its citizens. Similarly, they have also India have which I have already mentioned as well. India have formed this one-step crisis center supporting almost 300,000 women who have been facing different form of violence amid pandemic. So these can be some positive examples that we can learn from.
Okay, thank you very much, Arzu. There's a question from Becky, and Becky, thanks for your patience, and I'll read out Becky's question. Pradeep, I want to try to draw you in here for a response because part of it also, you mentioned the lack of resources for civil society to be effective. And, the question here from Becky is, are there specific nuances on the call for IFIs and MDBs to fund SDG 16 and here, clearly looking at the issue of resource. So Pradeep, your quick thoughts on this point.
James, would you like Josna to respond to it? It's related to SDG 16. But my quick response is strengthening democracy and building peace is, I'm not sure if it is related to the resource scarcity. Inequality, social protection are something which are related to resource scarcity. But building peace and all depends on how government behaves in their respective national boundaries, and if the laws are there and implementation are being done. But I think Josna is the right person to answer that.
Yeah. Josna, if you are there, please share your thoughts here on the question from Becky.
Thanks, James and Becky. No, I don't think there is any specific institutional arrangement for funding SDG 16 or plus, especially SDG 16, because these are very, very sensitive thing and issues. And, I would say that if you look at the national government, national level, I don't think any government is actually very much interested to talk about SDG 16 because of the issue that it has, like governance, accountability, because no government would say how corrupt I am. So somebody has to talk about, that particular government. Or so I think, but what we are saying that from the civil society, that there should be specific funds because SDG 16 is, has been regressing. And this is also related to the systemic issue, unwillingness of the government. So there has to have that kind of, I would say not motivation, but, a push from the civil society to have some sort of funding. But then so far there is no such, funding available or has been requested for the SDG 16.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josna. And we are kind of coming to the end as I wrap up and hand over the time in a couple of minutes to Karel. Perhaps this is the time, Karel, I'm prepping all the colleagues here for a photo op. So this would be a good time for you to, turn on your camera, and give us your big smile. So once again, thank you very much for the colleagues who gave the opening remarks from Community of Democracy, colleagues from ADN, as well as our speakers, sub-regional speakers in no particular order, Aoi, Gopal, Azru, Ying Hui, as well as Inkara, as well as our discussants, Pradeep and Josna. I know we have a closing remark, I believe, but I will leave Karel to guide us through the final few minutes. Meanwhile, I'll put the plug that we are having the Africa session tomorrow, 4 to 6 p.m. Bangkok time, as well as the third day, which is look at the regional and global overview, also 4 to 6 p.m. Special bonus is I'll be speaking, so don't miss that. So, Karel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. James Thomas, for the excellent moderation and laying out an excellent regional overview of the situation of democracy in Asia during COVID-19. So as said by Dr. James, I would like to ask everyone of our panelists, discussants, and researchers to please turn on your camera so we can just have a bit of a short photo session before we conclude. So I would like to ask you all to please smile. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. So I would also like to thank the researchers and discussants for providing sharp analyses on the situation of the various sub-regional areas in Asia. Clearly, there are a lot of intersections that have to interventions that have to be done to resolve a lot of the issues that were discussed to the end, and hopefully we can learn as well from the good proposals provided by our speakers. And through this, we have to harness the strength of development and democracy sectors for us to actually move forward in addressing the problems brought about by the COVID-19 situation. So tomorrow, we will continue with the sharp analysis of the state of democracy under the lens of SDG 16, but we will focus on the situation of Africa. So we still invite our Asian stakeholders to join us in this discussion. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you tomorrow and the day after. So I believe the closing remarks will be provided at the end of the session on the third day. So thank you very much and have a nice night. See you tomorrow, everyone.
I think, Karel, there was a request from Anselmo to take a picture for democracy in Myanmar. I don't know if it's possible.
Yes. So I would like to ask everyone to please raise a three-finger salute for our colleagues in Myanmar as they battle against autocracy, and we extend our support to them. Thank you very much for reminding. One more time. Thank you very much, and have a nice night, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Bye.